Welcome to the newest episode of the Unbothered Blondes podcast. This is going to be Getting to Know Me, Randa Caraba Part 2. And we're going to do this a little bit differently in the fact that Kate's not on this podcast. We actually decided it would be better for Grant to be on this one. And know that in the future of this podcast, you're going to hear episodes from Kate only, from me only, from Kate and Coop, from Grant and I, from Kate and I interviewing future guests. So it's not always just going to be Kate and Randa. So that's what we're kicking off with today. So if you listen to part 1 of Getting to Know Me, you'll know exactly where we left off. And it was Grant and I had met. We had gone on our first date. We'd been hanging out for a couple weeks, but we still had not had our first kiss. So if you're listening along, we're going to wrap up last episode, and then we're going to talk a lot about my career, building Southern Jewels, the evolution of my career. And if you are listening, please screenshot this, share it to your Instagram story, and feel free to leave us a review on Apple Podcast, because we love hearing back from y'all on ways that we can improve and better the situation. So last time it was Grant and I had not yet had our first kiss. We had moved very, very slowly. He was such a gentleman and kind of, not to sound dramatic, but gave me a breath of fresh air and made me believe in mankind again. So do you want to take the reins on how the first kiss went down, Grant?
Yeah. So it was kind of funny that, I always wanted to be a gentleman and very respectful, and I never want to cross boundaries. And so we were out at our ranch, and we had some friends over, and we were driving the four-wheelers around, and it started to rain, and as fate would have it, the Ranger broke down underneath the hay barn on the backside of the property. And so, of course, when the Ranger broke down, we didn't have anything to do, so we kind of grabbed some drinks, and Randy goes, "Hey, Grant, I'll race you to the top of the hay bales." And I said, "Okay." And so I thought she was actually wanting to race. I didn't realize it was a plot and a scheme the whole time. And so she said, "Ready, go." Of course, me being the competitive idiot that I am, I just completely spider monkeyed up there and beat her. I don't even think she was on top of the first hay bale by the time I was on the top. When I turned around,
Oh, give me a little more credit.
I think you got on the first one.
Okay.
And so anyway, long story short, I'm like, "Yeah, I beat you." And as she gets onto the top hay bale, what happens?
We had been hanging out. We're basically dating. He had already asked me to meet his parents at this point, but I hadn't met them. So I, at the top of the hay bale, just knocked him down like a football linebacker, was on top of him and made out with him. And all our friends were down at the bottom, and they were cheering us on. And I just had to take the bull by the horns.
And it was kind of funny because I was not expecting it. She kind of started jogging to me, and I'm like, can't go anywhere. I don't understand what's going on. And so she just tackled me to the to the ground at the top of the hay bale at that point, and just started kissing me, and I was like, "Oh, okay, that's kind of cool." And you can just hear Ashley Taylor down there going, "Red up, red up," just cheering us on.
And so after because he kissed me back, thank God, I didn't really know what was going to happen. And I was like, "Okay, you do like me." And keep in mind, every night that we've been hanging out, then when we would each go home to our houses, because we were neighbors, he would Snapchat me a picture of his running shoes or tennis shoes, or I would do the same. So we would go walking or running all these miles around our neighborhood, getting to know each other even more. So after I said, "You do like me back," he said, "Do you think I'd be walking 15 miles a week just if I did it?" So that's kind of where that was.
Yeah.
But we can go further into mine and Grant's relationship in the beginning of that in a future episode. I just kind of wanted to wrap up the last one, because what this episode is my career. So I'll kind of let Grant kind of interview me if he wants, or comes up with questions along the way, but I'm just going to kind of start telling the story, and as he comes up with things to interject or ask questions along the way, he will do so. So I'm a first generation college student from Texas A&M. I graduated from a very small town. I graduated on a Friday, had my party on a Sunday, moved to College Station on a Monday, and never looked back, and I've lived there ever since. So getting to be a student at Texas A&M, I was the loudest, proudest member. That is nothing to hold lightly. And so whenever I was a sophomore in college, I was hand making my own jewelry, like necklaces, because a lot of the stuff that I wanted to wear to the stock shows and rodeos, because that's how I grew up, they were either too expensive for me or they weren't what I wanted. So I just started sourcing out beads and learned how to make necklaces, and I was doing this for myself. Well, then other people wanted my creation. So at first, for my friends, I would just make it for them, right? Well, then more people wanted my stuff, and so I started selling it. And in December, so on Christmas break of my sophomore year at A&M, I went to the local courthouse and filed my first DBA, which means doing business as. So that way I could set up like a business account for this rather than like a personal checking account. And I would legit take pictures of my necklaces and I would post them as albums on Facebook. And keep in mind, back then Facebook did not even have business pages. So when Facebook launched business pages, Southern Jewels was one of the very first ones, and that's how I would sell my stuff. And then when I did my internship before my senior year at A&M, I moved up to Kansas City to be the intern at the American Angus Association, and that's when I realized that people knew me as Randa with Southern Jewels, my little jewelry business, more than Randa from Texas A&M or anything else. And so I think I kind of started lifestyle branding myself before I even knew that was really a thing. So when I graduated college, I graduated in 2009, and you'll know 2008, there was a big like economy crash and like housing market downhill slope, I guess you could call it. And a lot of people were graduating college without jobs. So a lot of people were staying to get their master's, not necessarily to get their master's, but because they couldn't get a job. And so I'm all about academia, but I didn't really know what I wanted to get my master's in besides an MBA and the program I wanted to go to. You needed to get out and have real world work environment experience for a couple years. So I decided to pursue my little jewelry business, and I told my advisor that I worked for all during my undergrad, and I told my parents and my grandparents, like, hey, I'm just taking a year off to figure out what my business is. And doing that at that point with the academia background that I had, they didn't really take that well, I guess you could say. Anything else to say here, Grant?
Yeah, so essentially, knowing her parents and grandparents and meeting all of her advisors, they all basically thought she was crazy, that it was just they were wasting their time, and then if you don't have, the more college degrees you have, the more successful in life you are, because it's obviously a linear progression that way, because that's what common sense, that's what we've always been told growing up our entire life. And so whenever she decided to go ahead and get her, or go into the jewelry business, they just kind of looked at her like, you failed us. We've invested so much time in you, and this is how you repay us.
Yes.
And so it's kind of funny how things worked out, and I kind of let her take over from here.
And what's crazy is thinking back to that time, because sometimes pride can get in the way. I remember when I graduated, I was like, I always had that safety net to introduce myself as Randa of Texas A&M. I was getting my undergraduate animal science and business. I had all these accolades, this wonderful resume, and had all these things to kind of back me up, if you will. Well, if I was going to really, I told my parents and advisor that I would take a year to see if I could make money with my business. And if I was not profitable within a year, I could not sustain myself or pay my bills, then I would get back to school. So I know a lot of them were wanting me to get back in school, but they allowed me that year for me to try to make it myself. Because again, I never had my parents' credit card. I was not financially dependent upon them. So doing that, I remember I did have a few friends that pushed me that were like, but it's really cool to say that you're Randa, owner of your own business, Southern Jewels. But I didn't see it that way. I really thought maybe if I just got a master's, because my advisor offered me kind of a master's on a silver platter, master's of ag business, not an MBA. And I was like, I could really be introducing myself as now I'm getting my master's and this and this and that. And I almost let that hold me back, because it's almost kind of like a safety net. And I went on by myself, and I would go to local rodeos and stock shows. I would travel where I was showing my cattle, and so I would have my animals there, and then I would like set up a Southern Jewels booth. And my sales would always be really, really good, but it was so hard to justify the travel expenses, the hotel expenses, the employee expenses, because I couldn't be doing both at the same time. So I would have to bring someone who could run it for me. And so I saw what the sales potential was, but I also didn't know how to cut down my cost. And so that's when I was like, okay, I have to stop traveling and I need to start selling online. So I started selling online. Like I said, I had my little e-commerce site. I was posting everything on social media. By this time, Facebook started doing business pages. And so then I started looking for a store, but in College Station, real estate, like on a commercial side, you're gonna sign at least a 4 to 5 year lease, pretty much anywhere. And so being 21 years old, on my own, I just did not have the credit that would sustain something like that. And the other thing is, gosh, I kind of lost where I was going. The other thing is, a storefront comes with a lot of expenses too. So I kind of X'd that and was like, that's my dream, but I can't afford it right now. Well, I was walking in the mall one day and I saw one of those kiosks, and we all know the kiosk where the crazy guys hunt us down, chase us down, trying to massage our feet or give us, hair crimping tutorials or all that kind of stuff, right? And I looked at it and I went and set up an appointment with the person who leased out with the mall, and they said that you could do the kiosk month to month. So it's not that I wanted a kiosk, because who wants a kiosk, right? But I knew that I could afford month to month, and it would allow me to see what sales would be without me traveling, paying for hotels. And I knew that I could work this pretty much myself because it was in my town. So I rented it from September to December. September and October, it was $1,300 a month, but only month to month so I could get out. And then November and December, with the increased holiday rush, it almost tripled in rent, and it was $3,500 each month. So I remember I didn't even know if I could stay through December, because I needed to see what I made September and October to see if I could even afford the next months. And my December sales, I believe, were like $24,000. And when I saw that, I knew that I could really make a business to sustain myself and to take care of myself this way. I just kind of had to figure it out. And again, always keep in mind ways to cut expenses to increase profits. So at that point, I stuck to online, and then the USA Today ran a feature story on me. It was me and another business. So basically it was saying how small businesses were utilizing social media, because again, this was the very beginning of like Facebook. Like, I don't even think I had Instagram yet. It was the very beginning of Facebook, and so they did the story on me because I was a young 21-year-old entrepreneur. And then they had like an elderly couple that was a retired couple, I think in their mid to late 70s, and they were selling ribbon online. I was selling jewelry. We were both big e-commerce customers, and that's where they found us. And so they ran this story basically on how anyone could use social media and e-commerce to build a business. So when that happened, the USA Today is like on every newsstand, at every hotel all across the nation. I remember I would have family members up in Ohio calling my parents whenever that story ran, and I did not tell anybody that story ran. I'll say that's something else about me. I'll give sneak peeks here or there, but I'm a doer and like an action provider rather than just a talker, because I knew, even though they had gathered the story on me and that they said it was going to run, I always know there's always the chance that it could get cut in production. And so I did not want to tell anybody that the USA Today was going to be featuring me and then it not happen, and I look like my word is not valid, right? So my parents didn't even know this was happening. And I am also a huge believer in signs from God. And so I was looking for a store at this point, and when this USA Today feature story ran, I was like, you know what, it really is time to start more actively pursuing a storefront. So I was about to sign on a little place in downtown Bryan. It was like 600 square feet, didn't even have a bathroom. I would have to use a bathroom out of their restaurant because they own the restaurant and this little store. And it was previously the wife's boutique, so I was gonna have to purchase all of her inventory, which didn't match my inventory or my brand. And I think that was like $18,000 of inventory. But again, they were gonna allow me to rent year to year rather than the 4 to 5 year. It was like less than $1,000 a month. So again, it was something in my budget. And I convinced my dad of this. He's our county sheriff in the next county over from where I live now, College Station. And so he was literally in the office with the president of the bank, because I had to have him co-sign for me because I did not have the credit for them to do this for me at such a young age. And he was about to sign, because I had already signed everything with that bank, and I know they thought I was nuts. And then I call my dad and I'm like, hey, don't sign. And he thinks I'm literally a lunatic. And I'm like, seriously, don't sign, because I had just gotten a message on Facebook from somebody that had this little house outside of town. It was this little yellow house, a salon, and she was able to purchase the building right next to her, which was like double in size, to expand her salon. And that way she was able to handpick who her renter or neighbor was going to be. And I remember saying, can I paint it pink? And she told me I could paint it pink. She allowed me to do a year at a time lease for only $500 a month. So as my dad's about to sign on this other place for me, again, he wants me to keep my little ass in school. He's not really supportive of this. He thinks I'm crazy. I finally convinced him to go to the bank, and then I'm like, oh, by the way, don't sign on that. And I think when I did the little $500 building, my pink house, I don't think I needed him to sign, because the other place was like $1,000. So that was a lot more money for me at that point. So that was the beginning of the little pink house. Within a couple months, the online really grew and expanded, and I bought a little Morgan building and placed it on an old concrete slab where there was a barn in the back. And so that's when I really started running my storefront and the warehouse like two separate businesses. The online was its own standalone business, its own inventory, its own employee and customer service, and the same for the storefront. I outgrew the little pink house in about 14 months, and that's when I went to my big location. Together it was like 3,400 square feet between my storefront and the online location, and I had to sign a big girl 5-year lease, and my rent was between $5,000 and $6,000 a month. It was a huge increase for me. But my first year in business at the little pink house, I'm not a super numbers person, but because when I give out numbers, that doesn't really show you profit. I did over $400,000 in sales at this little house outside of town that didn't even have its own parking lot. It was like rock. So I knew that getting in town, expanding to like 4 times the size, that I could really grow. And now I'll let Grant kind of come up with some questions so I don't just keep rambling.
Yeah. All right, so how scary was it when you did take that big growth step, and you now had your online warehouse was its own separate building, and then you had the Southern Jewels storefront where you were. What was going through your mind over this? Were you confident that you knew you could make it, or were you just like, oh my gosh, what did I just do?
Okay, so that's a great question because I was so confident all along. But my online manager, who ended up not staying with me very long, and it was probably the most dramatic employee exit, if you will. Breakup, yes. We didn't break up for a couple more months, but the day that I was signing that big girl lease was our first big blow up right before that. And there was a big fight. She like slammed the online door, and I just really don't like controversy. It was unnecessary, if you will. And so I was a little bit flustered from that. And so now it's one of my best friends, Katie Rufino, but she was a client of mine. She knew that I was looking for a place. She actually found my store for me before it was ever listed because she knew that it was going to be coming available. So she was my realtor, and she had this 50-page lease, probably 25 pages, but I'm being dramatic. It was a lot.
Randy, you being dramatic? No, I don't believe that.
So I just had this, first big fight. I'm a little flustered. Katie comes over, and I know that I'm signing this the entire time, but then going through the act of actually signing it, I remember we get to the last page, and I look at Katie, who was just a client and a realtor and becoming a friend at that point, but now she's one of my best friends in the world. And I looked at her before I signed the last page, and I said, what am I doing? Am I going to make it? Is this going to be okay? And she's like, I think everything is progressing exactly the way it's supposed to. I think God is showing you that you have outgrown this. This is your next step. You're always going to find a way. You always have. You've known this is the next step. It was basically like I'm just looking for her to give me some, a pat on the back and guidance, because I don't even think my parents knew I was signing this day. I mean, I was so independent from such a young age that I signed it. And I remember I opened that new store in March. So I signed this in February because I had a month to do some build outs and stuff and freshen up the paint and change up the store like I wanted. And I got my key on to the store on Valentine's Day. And before Grant, I did have a couple other boyfriends, but nothing ever serious, right? And so I was always into my career. So I remember posting, I think it was one of my first Instagram posts, because Instagram was new about that time. And, everyone's posting their flowers and their date nights, and they're going to the concerts and all this with their boyfriends. And I posted a picture of my new keys to my new store, because that kind of just fit me and my life at that point. So that was a great question.
Absolutely. So now that you're moved in and you're settled in and you're comfortable, what were some of the exciting new things, or the exciting challenges you faced by expanding? Were you was it an increase of foot traffic? Did you have, since you had a separate, bigger warehouse, it was the UPS package guys coming more often? Kind of share your story of how you were growing and the exciting and scary things along the way.
Absolutely. So going from $500 a month in rent, and then when I got my little Morgan building and put it outside on the old concrete slab, I think I had to pay $150 for utilities. So going from $650 a month in rent to $5,000 to $6,000 just in rent, before bills, before insurance, before anything like that. That was a huge increase. I do remember the very first day that the store was open. It wasn't my grand opening, because I wanted to do a soft opening, kind of get my bearings set, and then we did a big grand opening party the first week of May. So the first day that I was open, I did 4,800 in sales, and I had never done anything like that in the little pink house. I don't know if I possibly could have. It was so small that I don't think it could have sustained that. So that was really exciting, seeing how I could grow, and I did. I continued to grow in the store and online. The store did still trump the online at that point, and honestly, I personally loved the store more than the online, but the online was such wonderful marketing and supplemental income, and it supplemented people coming into my store because they would see things that I posted online, and then they would come shop in the store locally because of that. So I did online, but online was not my only thing, and it was not the primary part of the business or the bread and butter. I would say the store was about 65% of my income, and then the online was about 40%. And then I would also travel to road shows like the NFR, that big rodeo in Vegas, different things like that. And so that would be additional income as well. So, I was doing good for a couple years. 2012, we joined the SEC and we had Johnny Football. So that was wonderful because I would print all these wonderful game day tanks. And the day before Alabama played at College Station that first year was my record year ever in business at Southern Jewels. Just that Friday before, seeing all the energy that everyone had. And so this was all my first year of business. I mean, it's like so many great things were happening, and there was so much energy in College Station, and there weren't many boutiques. And this was ahead of the online boutique trend. So I kind of was killing it on both ends. And I still loved what I did. I loved styling people in the store. I loved the day before game days where I'm running around like a wild woman, helping everyone get their outfits together for the game day. And then 2016 hit. In January of 2016.
Well, we're going to talk about Aggie 100.
Okay, yeah, we'll talk about Aggie 100 before 2016. So yeah, I grew so much that I actually, in 2015, made the Aggie 100, which is the top 100 fastest growing Aggie-owned businesses in the world. Right. And you have to at least be 50% owned by Aggies, because some businesses are owned by multiple people. So I never had an investor all along. I did take out like a $15,000 loan when I did my new store, just because my sign alone was like $12,000 that had to go outside. And so for me to keep growing and investing more into being able to grow, I did have to take out a loan. But I had a year and a half under my belt with great business numbers, so they obviously gave me a loan. I paid that loan off, I think, within 2 to 3 years. My banker told me that would be a great way to build credit, is take out a smallish loan and pay it off very short term, but longer than a year. He was like, you don't want to pay it off in less than 6 months because you're not really showing credibility and building credit. So I think I paid it off somewhere between 2 to 3 years, and that allowed me to grow. So actually, when Grant and I first started dating, 2 weeks in, I asked him to be my date to Aggie 100, as you heard on the last episode. And I was the number 11 fastest growing Aggie-owned company at the time, with a 90% growth rate?
93% compound growth rate.
93% compound growth rate over 5 years, because you have to be in business for 5 years and show those 5 years tax returns before. So that was like incredible, and that kind of shows you what moving to that new place and taking on that new risk and that new expense really allowed me in my business to do.
And I want to completely brag on my wife for a second, because it's kind of funny. Is around town, and I own several businesses, and so when we got there, we're all dressed up and we're in the table.
And you're local to there.
And I'm local.
There.
Yeah, so I know like over half the companies there. Like I'm friends with a lot of them. And so everybody was like, oh, Mr. Caraba, how are you? Shaking hands. So which company of yours made it this year? Congratulations. And I'm like, well, hold on now. I didn't make it. And they kind of looked at me dumbfounded. And I said, I'm here with my girlfriend at the time, when I'm saying girlfriend.
I mean, we've been dating 2 weeks.
Like 2 weeks. And I was like, this is my girlfriend, Randas. She made it with her boutique, Southern Jewels. And they just would look at me like I'm crazy, because we'll have to try to post the pictures somewhere. And she was in this beautiful white, dress. Like she just looked completely out of place versus everyone that was there. She's still the youngest person, or youngest female, youngest woman to ever be on the Aggie 100 list. And people just were completely dumbfounded that this little bitty blonde girl that was just on the Aggie 100, like nobody would believe it. And it's kind of funny is that I had the exact same reaction when we started dating.
I was going to say, that's my next question. Tell them what you thought of Southern Jewels when we met, because you knew where it was, and tell them how you knew where it was.
All right. So I like to partake in going to the bar after work on Fridays and Saturdays. And so it's a little place called The Tap in College Station, and it's literally the building right next door to where Randa's store was. And so I always knew where the boutique was, but it never dawned on me, never paid attention. And so we started dating. People were like, "Oh, she owns this boutique," and I'm like, "Oh, that is so cute. She owns this little thing." I was like, I wonder that, when she's going to get a real job, and like I just did not take it seriously because I didn't grow up in a town or I didn't grow up in businesses where I was like that business model doesn't make sense to me. Like, it's just women's clothing. Like, come on now, like you're just not making that much income. I was like, this is just like a hobby, right? Like, I did not take it seriously. And so whenever we went to the Aggie 100, they're sitting there. They go from 100 down to 1, and so they tell you.
And you don't know what number. You don't know what number you are.
Yeah, you have no idea what number you are. And so as they're going down, Randa's like gets up around. They're at number 20, and she stands up and she's in the corner and she's freaking out, thinking, "What were you thinking at that point?"
I thought that it was all a mistake and I shouldn't have been there, and that I wasn't on the list.
Yeah, and I'm like, "No, you weren't. You weren't forgotten." Well, all of a sudden they get down to like 80% compound growth rate, and of course I'm a math guy. I do most of my work setting up deals, and I'm really good at math. So I'm running the numbers. So I look at her. I said, "Hey, 3 years ago, what were your sales?" And she knew what her sales were, and so she told me what the sales were. And I'm sitting there going, so doing backwards math. I'm like, oh my God. Every time they announce the next number, I'm doing the math in my head, and I'm like, this is this amount in sales. This is this amount in total sales. And so when they picked her, you were number 11, you had 93% compound growth. I saw that total sales number in my head, and I'm like, you did how much in sales? Oh my God. I was beaming with just pride. Like, I just was so proud of her. And I'm like, this girl, this is a real job. Like, I'm like, oh my God. Like, I'm like, she's doing more than one of my companies right now. Like, what is going on here? Like, and I was just so proud of her, and I couldn't believe it.
And when Grant and I first started dating, because he, does real estate, land, development, industrial buildings, trailers, they're much more based on agriculture or, having land. So they're not big on social media or taking pictures and posting on the line.
Did not.
That he literally asked me one time, we were hanging out after work, and he goes, wait, you schedule work time and you pay people to take pictures during work?
My mind was blown. I couldn't believe it. I was like, you're literally scheduling time
away from work
during the workday to take pictures of clothes. Like, that's a real thing.
So he didn't get it. So finally, once we've been dating long enough, I put my app on his phone so that he could see with my sales, because he's such a numbers guy. And he loves watching that kind of stuff. So I put my app on there, kind of because I got sick of him complaining when we had to take pictures.
Oh, I hated it. Because I'm sitting there like, it'd be 7:30 at night. And I'm like, hey, are we going to go to dinner? Like, I'm just not understanding this, because I'm like, do you want to be married? I was like, do you want to be married to your job, or do you want to be married to me? Like, are you dating your work? Are you dating me? Like, what's going on? Because I'm not, at that point, I'm pretty selfish, like, pretty full of myself. And I'm like, well, what about me? She's like, okay, let me put the Shopify app on your phone, and you can kind of see sales. Well, about a week later...
let me say it.
Okay, you do it.
Let me say it. So then I just put it on his phone, because I'm like, I'm going to shut this up, right? He comes to me the next week and he goes, Randa, when you take those pictures and post them on social media, you make the sales. And I'm like, no shit, Kung Fu.
Because I'm sitting there, she'll post it, and I'll see it online, and all of a sudden the little app will go, cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. And I'm like, okay. So finally I was like, hey, Randa, we need to schedule more time for pictures. You need to post more pictures on there because you make more sales. And it was just hysterical.
So let me tell you, I don't know how many years went by in my business that my parents, especially my grandparents, even my advisor would be like, so when are you going back to school? And finally I had to say, I'm not. This is it. This is doing great and wonderful. And I'm an entrepreneur. I've proven it. So we're not going back to school, okay? So then, now let's talk about 2016. So I was on top of the world 2010 through 15,
yep.
Right? 2016 hit, and in January, there were multiple reasons why I think 2016 hit. Number one, I was expanding my wholesale business. So like the stuff that we would design and sell in-house, I would also sell to other boutiques to kind of build the Southern Jewels brand. So I was going to market not only to purchase clothing for my store, but I was going to sell my design. So that required more market time. So I was away from the store more. I went to the first ever big retail convention it's called the Big Show in New York, and so I went there, and I was away. So basically, I was trying to, as you're trying to build, you kind of get away from the basis, if that makes sense. You know, because I had a team at home to take care of things so that I could go grow and expand and do all these other things. Well, I think that, along with the fact that that same year about 10 other boutiques went into business in town. Now social media is so much more popular that for your stuff to be seen, you really have to be doing paid advertising. There were just, people were opening